Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of OneTAKE Live, the show where we talk about the future of work, life, and culture with visionaries, entrepreneurs, academics, authors, and game changers in the fields of work, life, and culture. I'm your host, Ian Barkin. Please do follow me on LinkedIn so you can see alerts when the next show goes live. We try to do these things once or twice a week, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. Hope everyone is well and out there and excited for what is going to be a great show. Again, when you talk about the future of work, life, and culture, you cannot do those subjects justice if you don't highlight and focus on the insight, the vision, the purpose, and the leadership that will make that all happen. And so I am thrilled to welcome my next guest, who is the world's guru on those very topics. Dan Pontefract, welcome to OneTAKE Live.
Guru, Ian, you are so out of your element here. That is nothing what I am. I am just a guy plodding my way along my purpose statement, which is we're not here to see through each other. We're here to see each other through. Glad to be here.
I love it. Thank you. Welcome to the show. I'm going to spend the rest of the time we have together proving you wrong that you are, in fact, a guru. So here we go. Let's bring it on. I will say, first and foremost, thank you so much for being here. You are so busy. You are a speaker, keynote speaker, a TED talker, an author, a coach, a consultant. So you were busy, and you used to travel and be busy. You're now home and busy, and you're using your home studio extremely well. I've seen some cool videos where you show off your kit. You've also done a lot of podcasts. And so while prepping, I listened to some of them and I realized there aren't very many questions you haven't been asked already. So I'm going to start with some questions I didn't hear you being asked. So first and foremost, okay. What is your favorite color?
My favorite color is red.
Red, very nice. Okay. Second question, and this is going to get into some cultural background for a moment. Is it purpose? Or sorry, not right. Purpose is, I threw myself off. That's the topic we'll discuss about. It starts with a P. I was almost there. Is it process or process?
Oh my gosh, I'm Canadian. It's process.
See, okay.
Also,
so look,
it's donut right after process. When you have a process, you eat donuts.
Ah, nice. I like it. So, okay. So that's a little bit of your background. So you are, in fact, Canadian. You are the founder and CEO, interestingly, of a company that bears your last name. So I'm assuming you were either really lucky in finding it already in existence or you yourself founded it.
It's funny, then I got hired. They were like, coincidence.
Right.
Also, do you have a castle named after you in England? I said, I do. Okay, it's in New York. And then do you have black licorice named after you as well? I said, yes, I do. Pontefract cake. So it was really win-win-win day, Ian. It was a wonderful day.
So I was not aware of this castle. So I may have to scrap every other question I've got. Tell me more about this castle.
Well, I'm 13th in line. It is in ruins. However, when I do show up, there is a red carpet, hence the point of the color red. And I'm like the only time I'm ever a real star. It's fantastic.
Okay, that is insanely cool, and I've got to find a way to work that back into our discussion. But before we work back a castle and your impending rulership, give us a bit of background on yourself, the education you went through, and then ultimately you ended up before the Pontefract Group and you founding it. You were at TELUS for a while. So to walk us up to that point, because I want to explore some of the roles you played during your time at TELUS.
Yeah, and again, spoiler alert, I'm kind of still at TELUS, but I'll come back to that in a second. So okay. I guess when we kind of play off of the last name there, my last name in Latinian means broken bridge. Ponte is bridge, fract is fracture. When you break something, you have a broken bridge. So I've always been kidding around that I'm trying to be the opposite of my last name. I'm trying to build bridges. And so as a young kid, immigrant from England, my parents, ended up in Hamilton, Ontario. It's about 40-ish minutes from Toronto, for those that don't know. And steel town. And a guy that likes red and wears shirts like this and is kind of bald, kind of fish out of water. So that being said, I was always trying to find my way with those that were different, or perhaps, knowing that I was maybe different, how might I align myself such that I could provide, some sort of goodness or camaraderie with those that I was serving. And I meant serving by, president of student councils, captains of soccer and athletic teams, b-ball and what have you.
Sure.
And I said, okay, well, I think I'm destined to go help people. Being the opposite of my last name, trying to figure out how I take some of the innate skills that was gifted to me to help lead others. I ended up in Montreal, McGill University. I stopped myself from going through with being a doctor and pulled out of medicine and pre-med, went into an education degree at the absolute behest of the guidance counselors at McGill, who said, you should not go into that. You're too smart. And I said, I'll show you. And yeah, I thought I was going to be a teacher. So I taught high school for a couple of years, moved my way into higher ed, which is higher education, and started helping adults. And then I made the shift into the corporate world as a chief learning officer, first in high tech for a company that eventually became SAP. And then TELUS, which is kind of like AT&T or Verizon of Canada, for those that don't know. And about 50,000 employees and about $15 billion in revenue.
Great, thank you. So huge company. There's a lot behind that guidance counselor statement. We'll have to unpack that later, because I think that's disappointing, because the future requires education, and it requires folks as smart as you to be spearheading it. So okay, so then you got to this role of chief learning officer. You did some really interesting initiatives while at TELUS as chief learning officer. You launched an MBA program. You had a leadership philosophy that you crafted. Can you explore? Let's go into the MBA program, because that one's really intriguing to me. What was the impetus for that, and how did that come to be?
Yeah, and I preface everything by saying this is not the Dan show. Tons of great team members that worked with me side by side, achieving all kinds of great things. So definitely not a Dan thing only. That being said,
leadership? Because I take credit for everything my team does. It's all me. Should I do that differently?
Maybe that's an American-Canadian polarity difference, but you go for that, Ian. I think that's great. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
the MBA was one of those opportunities where I was looking around at some of our spending in external universities and colleges. And although the organization did a wonderful job of investing in individuals going to, a Harvard, a Wharton, a McGill for an MBA or the like, my idea was, well, what if we not necessarily stop that, but what if we diverted much of that investment into one MBA that we partnered with a particular university to develop and deliver, and it was dedicated just to TELUS team members. And so the idea landed like a lead balloon back in 2014.
Interesting.
When I pitched it to the CEO and the CHRO/COO at the time. But then a year later, they came back to me and said, hey, that crazy ass idea of that like MBA thing? Yeah, let's go do that. And so lo and behold, what happened was we went across the country, interviewed a bunch of universities, ended up partnering with one, the University of Victoria on the West Coast. And in fact, and indeed developed our own MBA with them, obviously, where 20-ish team members every 2 years go through a dedicated MBA, and we're just about to complete the third cohort of 20 individuals, and we're just admitting the fourth cohort of 20 individuals. And now I say that in present tense is because despite the fact I left TELUS full time in the end of 2018, the CEO was kind enough to ask if I would stick around and still continue playing a part with the MBA. So I'm privileged to still be associated with TELUS whilst on my own and running whatever the Pontefract group is.
Beautiful. Okay, perfect. That makes sense. So, and what's so interesting about that is, the MBA degree itself, I suppose, gets some flack because people wonder whether it's actually giving people the skills they need to play roles in middle and upper management. I have an MBA myself, so I get a kick out of some of the memes, but to develop one in conjunction with a company who knows what you're going for and obviously is carefully selecting the coursework or the focus areas. So what's the emphasis? Is it more on soft skills? Is it more on financial management and accounting? What do you emphasize in the program?
Well, these days, if you kind of really do look at where MBAs are, they haven't really materially shifted its pedagogy and curriculum since, I think, Ian, the Cenozoic era, which was in and around dinosaurs, which is a tongue-in-cheek way to say that the anachronistic model that is the MBA is what I loathe. And that is much of which to do is around shareholder return and the fixation on profit for profit's sake. That is not the point of an MBA. That's not the point of leadership. That shouldn't be the point of organizations in principle. So how we crafted and devised the MBA itself, the pedagogy, was working with a university who wanted to do things differently. And in fact, that's why we chose the University of Victoria, because they were already doing things differently and believed in what is sort of our sub-mantra in the MBA, which is purpose with profit. So you can inculcate a culture of an organization by virtue of looking at the MBA pedagogy and say, look, we are balancing our need to take care of all stakeholders, not just shareholders. TELUS is a publicly traded company. Fantastic. However, we also have many different shareholders that we should attest to, whom are stakeholders. So the environment, the community, team members, suppliers, partners, customers. And so when you think about what a pedagogy should look like, Ian, it should be well-rounded, holistic, driven by purpose, but knowing that you still have to achieve financial goals as a publicly traded company, not just fixate on the fact that you're, on the New York Stock Exchange and or the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Sure. No, great points. I will take slight offense to the Cenozoic era and MBAs. I'll have you know, I have yet to be hit by a meteor thanks to my training. So it has come in handy. Also, I know how to handle the T-Rexes when they show up. So that's also, I guess, relevant.
You can box with them really well because of very short hands, I guess. Is that
very short arms? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's evolve now to leadership. So, well, actually, no, I don't want to leave this before we. I do want to talk about another role you played at TELUS. So you were the chief learning officer, but you also held a position which I would love you to explain to me, which is you were the chief envisioner. What does one do as an envisioner?
Well, the first thing we did was we wanted to mess around with the press because envisioner isn't a name or a word. So that made them crazy every time we went in the press with it. But mostly it was me and the idea of having a small troubadour of team members dedicated to helping TELUS clients and customers with their own culture, flexible work styles, engagement issues.
Great.
And so what we did was we went out to clients across North America and helped them with, so you're looking, this is pre-pandemic, by the way, Ian, you're looking to shift the way you operate your organization from always in the office to maybe sometimes working from home, mobile also. So you need culture change, you need process change, you need leadership change. And we would help them with that transformation, but we'd get into other things as well. Sometimes leadership modeling, learning modeling, like how do you change the way in which that you actually operate? And one of the things I think I'm really proud of with the tenure at TELUS between 2008 and 2014, before I switched on to the chief envisioner role, was that as an organization, and everyone was working on this, our employee engagement scores that we kind of tested twice a year went from the very low 50s to almost 90%. And so over a 5 or 6 year period, I think what we were doing at TELUS was really re-engineering how an organization, how leadership ought to behave, ought to operate with itself, with its customers. So we just basically took the boiler template of that and said, hey, y'all want some of this? We could help you. And that's what we did with the transformation office.
Y'all want some of this. I like it. That's very Canadian.
Very Texas Canadian. Yes.
Very Texas Canadian. Okay, so and that's a great pivot point. So you are a self-described leadership geek and an observer, and you were playing that role of observing and helping enterprises to then self-assess and figure out what they needed as far as leadership capability and training. And I mean, you touched on this too, as far as effectively leadership training in an academic setting hadn't evolved very much. So walk us through that pivot then. What inspired you then to go out on your own and to be the keynote speaker, the TED talker, the author that you are today?
Well, one thing, I needed to stay married. So as long as I was out of Denise's hair, then all's good, right? I guess
I can relate to that all too well, especially having been locked at home with said spouse. Yes. Okay.
One of my best friends, I would say, is probably my dad, and he turned 75 today. He's back in England, and he's got his second job, so he's safe and going to be locked out of his house soon and be able to walk around. My dad, when immigrating to Canada, never worked for anyone else other than himself and building up businesses in engineering and CPG, you kind of name it. Like I was just, and he's still got 3 businesses. He's an entrepreneurial madman. And so for me, as the firstborn of 3, I always looked up to my dad as an entrepreneurial madman, but with such respect. But I had never, ever worked for anyone other than, the man or the woman or, the organization. Sure. So someone was paying me a paycheck every 2 weeks. It was great, and I did my thing. But I always had my dad on my shoulder, invisibly, sort of squawking at me, saying, "Hey, son, when are you going to put on your big boy pants and maybe go out on your own?" And I always wanted to do him that invisible honor, I suppose, by, in fact, going out on my own and saying, "Yes, I am your son, and I could do this as well," before he's gone. And so I didn't want that ever to be one of those inkling moments on my deathbed itself saying, "Oh, why didn't you ever try that, Dan?" And I guess that goes back to my own DNA. And which is one of the 9 lessons in this book we may chat about later, but to remain curious. Like, I think one leadership skill I think everyone needs to remember is that what got you here is not going to get you there. Right. And if you don't remain curious about trying new things, and even if you fail, you're going to learn from that failure to help you build up, whatever might come afterwards. Like, go on, do it. If my dad can start 3 different businesses, lose them all, and then start again, making millions of dollars and losing it, I'm in. Like, I want to try that. So,
yeah.
Homage to Pops, I would say there, Ian.
That's tremendous. Okay, so first and foremost, most importantly, happy birthday to your father. Happy
75,
birthday, Mr. Pontefract. That is great, and he can go and hang with his buddies now.
Exactly.
And if the CDC is in fact right, he can hang with his buddies without masks on, as long as his buddies are also 75 and have gotten their shots.
Well, he looks a little bit like me, so he should probably keep the mask on. It's just that's better for everyone.
I don't know. You went from respecting and being very deferential to your dad to then, I don't know. But no, so first and foremost, happy birthday. Second, that sort of the entrepreneurial DNA and inspiration I totally get. I saw the same in my father, and actually I saw it in my grandfather. And I even to this day, I think about sort of the heritage, and I sort of wish my grandfather was still with us to see what I've been up to, just because I totally get the inspiration and drive for why you did what you did. Okay, so let's talk about. So you've written 4 books: The Purpose Effect, Open to Think, Flat Army, and most recently, this book called Lead, Care, Win. You've got an awesome background. A guest who brings their own backgrounds is bonus points. I got your, let's see if it focuses. It focused faster before, let's see. I got this camera that's supposed to focus quickly, and let's see if it does work. That doesn't work that well. Anyway, live theater. But Lead, Care, Win, I've got it on Kindle. And it speaks to, you've described it as less of a book and more of a field guide to help leaders through some lessons that are pretty foundational to being good leaders. this is a collection of your own experiences and inspirations from the prior books and from your consulting and your talks. How did you get to 9?
I guess cats. I mean, I believe in 9 lives. That's probably
Brilliant.
the easy answer.
And a good musical that was long running.
Yeah, I mean,
not a great movie rendition of it, but
I'd love to see Sorkin take on a Cats for the ER. I mean, that would just be amazing. The writing would be perfect, wouldn't it?
Perfect, and so fast paced that you'd wonder if anyone speaks like that. Anyway,
a lot of So ultimately, I could even do this. I bring props, like you said, right?
Bam.
So I know these Canadians, you never trust them,
right? Well, but they deliver when they show up.
We do try. Yeah. Well, the whole 49th parallel we're guarding with unbelievable angst right now. So, so what happened was you were kind enough to mention the first 3 books. One was about culture, one was about purpose, one about thinking. And as I was like running around a lot on my bike, I guess cycling around on my bike, I was like, well, Dan, how come you haven't really written a leadership book? But if you're going to write a leadership book, what ties culture, purpose, and thinking together? And why is culture so kind of disaffected in organizations these days? Why is purpose, still this thing that people don't quite get? Why are people overly stressed out and fractured and squirrel-like, if you will? So I kept going back to what's making the great leaders of whatever stripe tick. And I was batting around this idea that if any organization had a leadership philosophy, like we did at SAP and like we did at TELUS, might those attributes, or sometimes they're called competencies, although I want to hurl every time I hear the word, if those attributes or competencies were something that people could glom onto and their own personal leadership style to then invoke with their team, maybe that's what I could do as a give. And so the 9 were 12, were 8, were 4, were 15, were 58, because I was noodling what makes the most sense in a palatable way. That is, as you've mentioned, a field guide. And I didn't even call the book chapters. Like, it's not chapter 1 and 8 and 9. It's lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, lesson 9. So these are lessons that I believe tie together the really foundational principles of what makes up a, quote, more caring leader. And again, the caring leader is not about hugs, although it'd be nice to hug you, Ian, at some point in the future.
It would be nice to be hugged. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I like my wife, but I'd like to hug someone else at some point. That's another
I just want to leave the house.
I mean, I'm about to lick a stranger on the street, but that's the whole other level of weirdness.
That's a different discussion, and that's for my other podcast.
Sorry. I thought this was that one. I got confused where we were.
Yep.
The 9 effectively just say to me and to hopefully to leaders and to leaders of self, what is it that's going to help you be a human being in your pursuit of leading self and leading others? And I know that sounds almost disrespectful, but I think we've often these days, particularly in the midst of a pandemic, lost the plot on how we bring, ourselves, our true self, to, quote, work. And so the book is actually bifurcated in introspectively looking at yourself. How do I lead myself? But then also, if you are looking to lead a team, or you indeed are leading a team, what more might you need to do in order to be a more caring leader of others?
Right. So perfect, great setup. I want to delve into some of those 9 from a higher level perspective, though. And we talked about MBAs and leadership training. And is there a generational component here where, and could you imagine an executive, a titan from 100 years ago talking about purpose and caring and humanity and empathy? Or was that just so foreign, partly just because of the day and age? And although, while it might have always been relevant, it didn't feel appropriate. It felt very exposed. Has that gotten us to today, where we can more openly talk about hugs and empathy and caring about the whole employee?
I sure hope so. I sure hope there's an evolution of humankind.
Yep.
But that being said, I would refute the fact that there may not have been examples of a more caring type of leader in days gone past. And I think there are. I don't think, however, we know enough about them. And I'll give you a story from, the mid 1960s, an American story. So I'm paying homage to your audience, Ian.
Thank you.
There was a Speaker of the House. His name was Sam Rayburn, and he kind of served a couple presidents during the 60s and early 70s. And Rayburn one day, when he woke up in the morning, was advised by an aide before he got to work that a journalist in the Washington area had lost their daughter in a car accident the night before. Okay. And what does Rayburn do? He gets the driver to bring him over to the house of the parents, the journalists who had lost their child that night.
Sure.
And so, knocks on the door. Journalist is frazzled by the fact that the Speaker of the House is there at the front door. And as legend goes, Rayburn then says, "Hey, have you had morning coffee or breakfast yet?" And the journalist is like, "What? We just no." Yeah. And Rayburn pushes past the journalist and walks into the house and goes back to the kitchen, starts making breakfast. And so, but the journalist, as anyone knows in DC, they've got access to the dignitary's schedule, and it's always posted in advance of what they're up to. So the journalist sort of has the aha moment and says, "Wait a second." So he stops Rayburn and says, "Sir, are you not supposed to be at the White House right now?" And Rayburn, without skipping a beat, again, as legend goes, says to the journalist, "Yes, I was supposed to be having breakfast with the president. However, I phoned him in advance of this and told him I wasn't going to make it for breakfast today because I had a friend in need." And so if that's a political story potentially, and I'm not trying to be political, and it doesn't matter what party Rayburn sat in, by the way, right. It is humility, it's caring, it's empathy, it's championing the cause of someone else, it's being relatable, i.e. the human being part. I mean, it's certainly not all 9 lessons, if you will, of Lead Carwinian, but there's a wonderful story from the 60s of a man who was thinking of a family in need, even though he wasn't a friend, he was a journalist. So if we can push past, right, that I'm the leader and you're a subordinate, right? If we can push past the fact that, you're on the left, you're on the right, if we push past, you're of one color and you're another, or you're from one country and you're from another, like, it's just, we're humans. So the whole point of Lead Carwin is to say, all right, let's start with us being humans, and how do we operate with that humanity and that humble pie?
Right. And I think one of the interesting things about, it's a great story. And one of the interesting things about being virtual and distant from each other as a result of the pandemic is actually the opposite has occurred, as far as we're more exposed to our humanity because we're in each other's homes all the time now. Yeah. What was a funny hijinks and meme or mistake on a BBC interview of someone's kid and wife coming into the background then just became standard practice, right? Everybody's having their families walk in behind them, and dogs barking and printers printing and everything else that happens, which humanizes us. It's hard to maintain the appearance of an aloof, cold leader if chaos is going on around you, because that was always happening anyway, right? That was their lives. They just put on a face when they went to work, and now that's exposed. So I would imagine, are you seeing the same thing, that there's a humanity to the access that we're getting to leaders that otherwise would have been much more or put on an appearance of much more stitched up and cold?
I was really hoping actually that the recycling truck today was late, and then you would have heard the recycling truck like 6 feet in front of me right here doing its thing, because that's as real as it gets on a live LinkedIn session here, isn't it?
I've got a dog who, there's been sessions where the delivery comes to the front door and the dog is the cameo on the podcast. And what are you going to do? You just, again, live theater, so you just keep going. But yes, that's how we're exposed to each other's lives now.
Yeah, and so I guess to answer your question, yes and no, and I'm not fence sitting on it, but there are certainly leaders whom I've seen and know that have amped up their empathy gene, given the fact it's a pandemic, and given the fact that some people are living in 400 square foot condos in the middle of downtown, and there's 3 people living in that place, including a newborn. And you just like, what else are you going to do? You're going to make the gal or the guy go to the library, which is closed, and try to have a Zoom call. Like I do see that empathy happening. At the same time, what is occurring is the increase in mental health issues, and where I think we need to double down more as leaders is to go the extra mile of caring for what actually is going on with the psyche of team members. Because not only the boredom and not only the angst of, do I have a vaccine, do I not, have I had COVID-19, what are the long-term effects of having it? Like, there's just so many different nuances of the actual virus itself that we need to be thinking about. The elderly, my parents, I haven't seen them. My grandkids, I haven't seen them, like vice versa, right? So what are we doing as leaders to actually go the extra mile to ask questions of how they're doing, but then to provide resources such that the team member feels that it's not just a question of how are you, but that the organization and thus the leader is doing something about it. Yes. And so we could talk about gimmick things like going to virtual escape rooms and having camaraderie sessions and doing kitchen cook-off things and playing Jeopardy online and having drinks on Zoom tales as people call it. Great, fantastic. And you should be doing that, right? But maybe not too much, but enough to allow the camaraderie to continue. Sure. But what I'm getting at is, we've replaced the commute with more work time, more screen time, webcams on all the time. People are fatigued by, as I'm doing, staring straight into a camera and sort of not looking around the room for fear of people not seeing my eyes. Yep. So that's going to wear on people. Yes. And what are you doing as a leader to mitigate the mental health unwellness of people who have been cooped up and staring into a screen for a year? Right.
And I think empathetic, your point about empathy is so important, just because putting yourself in shoes, no matter which they are. So you've got that small apartment with a crying baby. You've got family members who haven't seen each other for a while. You also have isolation. You have singles who are alone, and that's as stressful, in some cases more. So to be attuned to and aware of everybody's personal situation and circumstance. You
look at data, Ian. I don't know about the US. I'm assuming is relatively the same as Canada, but consumption of alcohol is up 19% year over year.
Yes.
Yes. So okay. Hey, I don't mind. I don't mind IPA. I'm a big IPA fan, and I'm assuming that my alcohol consumption has gone up. I hope not 20%, but maybe it has. I haven't really checked. I don't know, but that's the average. Yes. So if you've got team members that are going 40 and 50% up, like there's some stress outlet that they're trying to use. In this case, it might be alcohol. So what are you doing as a leader? I think, so here's the thing. Lead Care Win, you have a fiduciary responsibility as a leader to check in on the soul, the psyche, the wellness of your team members. It's not a transaction of, look, we're paying you, so get on with the job, son, or daughter, you know what I mean? No, that is not the contract. The social contract between leader and team member is, hey, how are you? And yeah, we've got stuff to do. We got goals, objectives, et cetera. But I do care. Like, I do want to care. I should care, because if I see when you're debilitated, there's a mental health wellness issue, then I know the productivity and performance is going to lag and sag. So maybe I do have a responsibility here to be a human being in that relationship.
Beautifully put. I'm going to go to a question that one of our listeners shared from India, because I think that jumps off of this point, and then I want to even extend on it further. But Anish Turatiath from India, thank you, Anish, for submitting the question, says or asks, has the idea of a good leader been redefined during the pandemic as leaders had to take tough decisions during, like choosing between quality operations and profitability to the company? And what would be your advice to the next generation of leaders? So that's an interesting sort of implicit assumption there too that we could explore. So it's a choice between quality operations and profitability, assuming that means you spend more to keep operations quality because people are home and things are different.
Yeah, I appreciate and love the question, and thanks for posing it. The challenge I might have with it is, has it redefined leadership or exposed leadership?
Right.
And so I would suggest to you and purport that it has exposed what actually leadership means in life, in work, but in a crisis. And although we're all in the same pandemic boat globally, we've never had a crisis of this magnitude in our generation where we're all, again, in the same ocean on the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
But there will be, and I assure you, and you're, not as naive as you come across, Ian. It's a joke, right? You know that there are going to be organizational crises that come. Yeah. Like it's not going to be a pandemic, we hope, knock on wood, but there's going to be something like an acquisition or, a market current, a vector of some sort, something that's going to disrupt. And so we will be faced with another crisis. And so what I believe the pandemic has done is exposed what constitutes the right type of leadership to make those important decisions. How inclusive are you? We haven't even talked about Floyd and Black Lives Matter and EDI and just the inequality that's occurring in our organizations. That happened in the middle of a pandemic, which is like crisis number 2. And we've seen leaders do very well and kind of reposition themselves, and we've seen them not. So people have ignored it entirely. So again, I love the question. I don't think it's redefined, but it's exposed. And with that, I think we need to pick up the pieces.
Right. Perfectly put. Let's open the aperture for a moment, because there was the reference to the profitability of a business. And so ultimately, and we talked about this before the show, there's the purpose and the leadership that a leader has that directs the way that they interact with the teams that are directly reporting to them.
Yeah.
Right. They have some authority. There's a ability to impact through policy, through behavior, the people who are in their organization. But so many companies today are defined as an ecosystem, right? They have partners, third-party partners that maybe design or build or service the thing that company is known for. Do the principles of leadership extend beyond the walls of the company, and how do they, if you don't have direct line reporting over like your third party outsourcing provider that takes care of customer care for you?
That's a deep question. You got a whole book, or at least an HBR article, I think, in you on that one.
Let's do it.
So here's the bottom line for me. Whether I was an executive, running learning and leadership and whatever I was doing, right? And even today, as I'm working with organizations and executives, what I don't get, Ian, is why a finance team or a procurement team or leaders in general, I don't understand why they treat the ecosystem of those that help that organization create value like equals, like they are a team member. It doesn't compute. So why aren't we treating a supplier like one of us? Why do we call them contractors? Why can't they be team members? Although they might not be, quote, full-time, they're contractors. I really don't understand that whole notion of why we're not using the same principles of leadership, i.e. the ones you might see, on the screen here to the left. Mm-hmm. Why can't we use the same? Why do we have to treat them as if they're a different type of human being? Aren't they human beings?
Right.
Now, I get the ideas of MOUs. I understand SOWs. I understand service level agreements. Like, okay, again, I'm not naive to say that I haven't been in the situation where you're having to have contractual agreements for levels of service, conduct, etc. Okay, makes sense. But in the same token, when I see leaders treat suppliers or partners or people on the outside whom are providing a similar level of service or value to the same customer in which they serve, yet they're treated by that organization differently because they're under contract.
Right.
It is disgusting. Right. And again, I ask leaders to look in the mirror. Why would you treat a human being differently that way? And do you think that's actually working to draw blood from the stone of your quest for more productivity or efficiency from that contract?
Right. Well, I mean, it harkens back to the Speaker of the House story, but it also, as I was reading early on in the book about being relatable and this veil that leaders often thought that they needed to put up of infallibility, that they were strong leaders and you couldn't know them as people with flaws and humanity. You see the same thing across the table in these partnership relationships between suppliers and vendors or buyers or whatever you want to call them. But in those B2B relationships, it feels, through my lens, just because it's the world I've lived in for so long, as I was reading that, it felt as relevant, if not more so, that you need to be relatable, you need to champion others, you need to understand what your common purpose is, because you're all in effect on the same team.
Which is exactly the point. And I think I've begun now to have a new best friend relationship with you, Ian. And again, some people don't see that.
Yeah.
They look at the supplier, the vendor, the worst word ever, right? Vendor.
Mm-hmm.
Like from French sale or Latin sale, vend, right? To say, so you're the vendor selling to others, but you're not in some sort of relationship with me.
I always just see a vending machine you pound on when the chip bag doesn't kind of crisps don't fall down. Like that seems very functional and cold, and that's
or McConaughey stuck in a Doritos one.
Right, I mean, exactly, which is a hilarious commercial when he goes 3D. Yep, exactly. Okay, so a few other things I want to wrap up because we don't have a whole lot of time, and I could spend hours talking with you because you're cool and we're now best friends, and that's the quintessential leader. So somebody who exhibits these characteristics, and I imagine it's different per industry, maybe even per geography and region, but who in your mind is the embodiment of that sort of that aspirational good that you work with clients and you think of when you're talking to large audiences about being a true leader for the modern era?
It's a profound question, and one that I'm loath to answer directly because it then taints, the goodness of others. So here's what I will say.
I like it.
It's probably a spoiler alert. That's
elusive and mysterious. I love it. Keep going.
It's a spoiler alert, but I'll go with it. In the book, Lead Care Win, I end the book with one of three stories. And this one is about a gentleman whom I don't even know his name. And basically the story goes, when I asked Denise, my better half, for a hall pass to go to New Orleans to see if I had a book in me because I needed to be inspired, and I had never been to New Orleans. I one day, stumbled into the House of Blues because it's a Canadian institution because of Dan Aykroyd. I'm like, this is great. And I walk in and I see what turned out to be a father-son duo playing piano and drum / guitar. And, they're kind of a few songs in and they played like 10 more and then they took a break and then I'm watching a hockey game and then they came back and they played 6 more. But I was there, I was in. These guys were good, right? Yeah. But then they end and they preface a couple other songs by saying, well, this is the first time we're playing this tonight. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. But the last song, when the older gentleman, the dad, I guess, came up, he said, this one's for my wife. I was like, well, this is cool. I mean, Denise let me go on a hall pass in New Orleans. I've been writing and, this guy is giving one out to his wife and he says, it's Stand By Me. Okay, this is great. So I film it because I'm going to send it to Denise. Sure. So I'm like, it's fantastic, great. They pack up, they leave. And then about 10 minutes or 15 minutes later, the eldest sort of comes around behind my table, almost unbeknownst to me, and scares me and says, "Hey, you were watching us all night. Thanks for coming." Now, there's about 100 people in this House of Blues at this point, and he just chose to sort of tap on my shoulder. And he says, "Weren't we good tonight?" I was like, "Wow, bold, but yes, you were amazing." And he said, "Wasn't my son fantastic?" And at the time, I didn't know it was his son. He's like, "Oh, he was just great." And then, honestly, Ian, this is where I lost it, and this is where I came up with the idea of lead care win for the title of the book. And I still don't know his name. This is horrible. But he says, "Well, tonight was the first time in 6 months that we played live. I had to take care of my wife for a while there. She passed, but I thought we were pretty good tonight."
That's got it.
And I just, I lost it. I thanked him. We hugged, and he left into the darkness. Now, when I think about the 9 lessons, there's a lot that came to me from that gentleman, right? I think about the courage to get up there and try new songs. I think about his relatability to me. I think about his empathy with his wife. I think how he was helping his son, I would imagine, right? By saying, "Hey, come on, let's go play House of Blues tonight." How, when he was introducing other songs, he was talking about, some of the Black musicians he loved in New Orleans, thinking about the commitment to balance. And the embracing change. These guys said, "Hey, this is a new song with some new drums we're trying out tonight."
Right.
Like there are kind of like these like, I don't know what you call them, like bongos. That's what they were. Okay. I was like I just honestly, Ian, it was I'll never forget it. And again, I pay homage to him and his son and his wife, I guess ultimately, because it was love. I was going to call it love-based leadership. And then that night I noodled around lead care, like care being love. But anyway, my hat tip to that guy. And he's my quintessential lead care win leader.
That's a great story. And his humility and his genuine enthusiasm for what he was doing, and the pride that he shared in his partner and his son, and how he did. That is a great motivational story and a great catalyst to a title in a book.
It was. I'm indebted. I really am, and I will hunt them down, and
I will hunt you down. I will find you, inspirational man, and your son. Well, I will aspire to help as well, and we'll find them. So thank you for that, and the archetype of the quintessential leader who embraces and listens, is empathetic, is human. Is there going to be a new, I guess my final question, is there going to be a new leader paradigm that comes once we're all back to some form of whatever normal becomes? You touched on mental health. You have management musings I got to listen to, which were great. And one of them you talked about moving to a hybrid work model and management having to stay attuned to the mental health of their teams. Is there going to be a new paradigm of leadership that comes out of pandemic once we can all hug each other again and see each other face to face?
I hate the term, Ian, but this is the paradigm shift of all time. This is the inflection point of all time. This is the look in the mirror and shake my booty differently point of all time. If a pandemic is not waking you up from your catatonic coma of how awful perhaps your leadership has been, or even if there are nuanced changes that because of the pandemic and the way we've been isolated, alone, stressed, angst, etc., you really have to ask yourself, why are you a leader? So I fundamentally believe that the reflection that we've had over the past year, I mean, happy anniversary, Ian, it's pandemic week anniversary, right? It's a chance for us to do good in that redefinition, I suppose, and again, the exposure of what it is that we want to do differently.
Beautiful. That is our quotable meme right there at the end. Dan, thank you so much for your inspiration, for your good humor, for your time. with us. I know that the guests of OneTAKE have loved this. We will share links to your website, to your book, to your musings, so that folks can find them. Look, there's a link to your website right there. I wasn't lying when I said stuff. It just sort of magically.
Andy, I mean, Jim in the background there. You just
That's
a
right. It's
producer
all Jim.
maniac. Producer maniac.
We aim to please. But there you have it. So Dan, thank you so much. Hope you stay safe and well. Happy birthday to your father. That is exciting news. And for everyone tuning in, thank you so much for tuning into OneTAKE, and look forward to coming at you again soon. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Ian. My pleasure.